Manga, a Japanese drawing style used for graphic novels, is one of the most popular forms of media for experiencing all kinds of stories or narratives. While it's popular, its appeal and accessibility can sometimes be limited due to language barriers or regional exclusivity. Because of this, alternative visual styles like motion manga were created to make these stories more accessible to people. Motion manga, or manga anime, is a visual style that complements original manga art by adding movement, sound, and effects that enhance the image. Think of it as a form of visual rhetoric. Sonia Foss describes this as the actual image writers generate when they use visual symbols for the purpose of communicating. It is a tangible evidence or a product of the creative act, such as a painting, an advertisement, or a building ad. It constitutes the data of study for rhetorical scholars interested in visual symbols. Motion manga happens to follow the same characteristics as this definition. It is a visual style that uses symbols for the purpose of communicating. In this case, motion manga is a way of communicating a narrative. It provides an alternative way to experience a story, not quite animation, but rather a stepping stone into it. In this visual criticism, a video essay will be used to analyze the mechanics and fundamentals of motion manga in order to justify the use of the visual style. An analysis of the visuals, audio, and pacing of motion manga will be used for this justification, by using various examples and explanation of whether or not it's an essential option for communicating a narrative to an audience can be made. A quick note before we get started. Each artifact of analysis in this video was chosen because of its relation to both the traditional manga and motion manga styles. By using comparisons between the two styles, a proper analysis can be formed. The visuals of motion manga are an integral part of what makes the style work. The way they can be implemented in different ways adds to the accessibility of the works. This is because of how the original form of the art is conveyed. Manga uses static images that are complemented by things like action lines and illustrated sound effects that add emphasis to the inferred motion or expression of a scene. The visuals of motion manga enhance these inferred factors and make them clearer to the reader. A good example can be in the manga adaptation of the game Kingdom Hearts 2 by the author Shiro Amano. On pages 74 and 75 of the first volume, various katakana is used to express sound effects, mainly pachi, gyun, and zun. Each of these sound effects is complemented by action lines, character expressions, or body language. For both of these pages, sound effect notation, action lines, and character expressions are used in conjunction with one another to build up to a final scene, where each element is used to its fullest. It starts out small and simplistic on page 74 and builds up to become bold and eccentric on page 75. Some panels are also given implied depth with the use of juxtaposition between simplistic and complex art. However, problems can surface when considering the widespread interpretation of the art. Not everyone is going to interpret the art in the same way, especially those who aren't familiar with the style. The static nature of the images could make it hard to interpret the intended visuals from the artist. While it's not true for most people, it's certainly something that could happen. Motion manga stifles these problems by offering common ground in terms of presentation style. By using this visual format, the illustrated sound effects, action lines, and character motion are made abundantly clear with the addition of small animations. Action lines are actually moving, sound effects are popping, and panels can shake as if they're reacting to the actions that are going on in the art. With the addition of color to some motion manga, the intended depth of an image can also be made clear. The best example that takes these elements into full force is the video game Gravity Rush. This game uses motion manga to present the main parts of its narrative instead of using full 3D animation for most of its runtime. It uses subtle animation techniques to emphasize the different elements of manga. In addition to this, depth is heavily emphasized with the use of gyro control. While the player can flip through the pages as expected, they can also interact with the depth of the image by tilting the console. The visual style adds a layer of immersion to manga that can't be done with traditional works. It also enhances the art that's already there by providing a new viewing experience for manga enjoyers. This refers back to the point of the argument of whether or not motion manga is an essential option for communicating narratives. With a comparison of these presentation styles, it's clear to see that it's significant. Not only does it enhance the art, but it also makes it more accessible. Not all manga is translated for every audience, and it can be seen with Gravity Rush itself. The game also has a manga adaptation, which remains a regional exclusive to this day. There's no official translation, and the only way to obtain it is to order an import from Japan. Because of the motion manga that's used in the game, not much is lost in terms of art presentation or preservation. In addition to its art enhancements and accessibility, there's still more factors to consider with motion manga. Sound design is another factor that adds to the visual style of motion manga. Like the visuals, the sound is able to complement the elements that make manga art function. Previously, a discussion was made on illustrated sound effects, where Japanese katakana was used to express sound. The manga, My Hero Vigilantes, utilizes visual sound effects very well. The use of this technique in fight scenes adds a lot of bite to the art. These illustrated sound effects are often bold, which makes them stand out. While they serve as a visual element in traditional manga, it's more of an auditory element that complements the visuals in motion manga. This clip right here could serve as a pretty good example.
Whoa! Ouch!
Oh no, I've got nerd germs on my leg.
You're dirty now.
I think I might have hurt my leg. Hey, nerd, are you gonna take responsibility for this?
In addition to the clarity of sound effects, other elements regarding the use of traditional sound design also come up with motion manga. Things like background music and ambient sounds add to the atmosphere of a given scene. Whether it be a classroom, city, bedroom, or neighborhood, each scene is given a clear and specific mood in this visual style. However, the most significant addition to sound design in motion manga is voice acting. While the clarity in sound effects and mood are improved, a factor like voice acting ties it all together. This way, the reader isn't left to interpret the emotions of a character on their own. It's now abundantly clear what the characters are feeling in a given scene. This visual style is able to take advantage of the fact that it's an alternative format, and it also ties back to how motion manga is an essential option for narrative communication, because it adds another layer to accessibility for experiencing the art or story provided by a manga. Sound design tends to be pretty consistent when it comes to giving the reader descriptions of the characters and the world they live in. Locations usually have their own unique sounds to distinguish them from other places. Because of this, it's possible to figure out the context of a given scene just by listening to the sound. Think of motion manga's sound design as an audiobook. It adds more accessibility to different narratives because it provides an alternative way to experience them. For example, and this may be a little bit far-fetched, but people who are blind wouldn't be able to see the art. But with the proper sound design, it would be possible for them to experience the same narrative. And the same thing could apply to deaf people. If they can't interpret the art properly, the subtle animations that are incorporated into motion manga help to convey the narrative. But if someone's both deaf and blind, I don't know what to do about that. Both the visual and auditory elements of motion manga cultivate into a visual style that has a lot of intended purpose and coordination. These things merge into the final factor that ties everything together. The pacing of motion manga is what ties the whole thing together. While the static images of traditional manga are fine to have on their own, the author's vision for the format and the clarity of a scene can be enhanced through the motion manga format. The best example of the benefits of pacing when compared to motion manga is the original work for K-On! This manga doesn't use the traditional right-to-left progression style seen in other works. Instead, it uses a different style called Yonkoma, which is a 4-panel manga style that uses an up-to-down progression for its storytelling. On a first read, something like this could come off as pretty confusing, especially when the usual instinct is to read from right to left, like with most traditional manga. With motion manga, a misinterpretation of the narrative's progression isn't usually something that needs to be worried about. This is because the pace is predetermined due to the fact that the narrative is being presented in a different style. Combined with the visual and auditory elements that make motion manga a strong visual style, the pacing of the narrative becomes clearer to the reader. The visuals and audio work in conjunction with each other, creating a flow of art and sound that can't be achieved without the context they're presented in. Whether it be a game or a video, motion manga is able to simultaneously immerse people into a narrative while providing unique aesthetics to a piece of art. Because of these elements, the pace of the story can be emphasized. Overall, motion manga as a visual style increases the quality and production value of a piece of art without budgetary constraints. At the same time, it's able to immerse readers into a story while making it accessible to as many people as possible. It's a convenient way for producers to make a stepping stone into animation. At the same time, it provides a unique reading experience that can't be achieved using traditional manga. Overall, motion manga serves as an efficient way to communicate a narrative. It offers an essential alternative for presenting a compelling story to an audience by using various visual and auditory elements that complement each other. They weave in and out of each other to immerse the audience in a way that traditional manga simply doesn't have the ability to do. The visual style can also be presented in a variety of contexts, which makes it more accessible to most audiences around the world. With its digital format, it can be translated to fit other areas of the world without too much hassle. The audio of motion manga complements these visuals by adding another layer of immersion to the narrative it presents. It serves as a benefit to the producer of the art as well as the people who consume it. Through the use of these elements, motion manga proves to be a great alternative to traditional manga.